Hello again, and thanks for staying with us. So following the approval of a 9 billion rand loan from the World Bank, South Africa is set to embark on an ambitious renewable energy drive. In fact, the funds, we're told, will be used to redirect the country's efforts towards a low-carbon development path with reliable, affordable and sustainable energy for all. At the top of the list is repurposing the Komati coal-fired power station, using renewables. For more on this, let's bring in Professor Mark Swilling, who's the co-director at Stellenbosch University's Center for Sustainability Transitions. The Prof, as you can see, joining us via our video link this morning. And it's lovely to see you once again, sir. Thanks very much indeed for making time. You know, we've often heard that we can't necessarily throw money at the problem when it comes to South Africa's energy crisis, but money certainly is important. Do you agree with the priorities for this loan from the World Bank when it comes to how we actually roll out this transition?
Yes. I mean, it's an absolute necessity if we want to end load shedding to get 10,000 megawatts of new generation capacity onto the grid within 2 years. And the only technology that allows you to deliver new generation capacity that quickly is renewables. And so Komati is a relatively small but important contribution to that overall goal.
Yeah. How important would it be, for instance, to repurpose a Komati as opposed to starting to build a plant from scratch, a renewable plant from scratch? I mean, I suppose there are a few advantages there, isn't it? Because, for one, the infrastructure is already up as a start, and I imagine the operation costs go down because of that.
Well, the big advantage of anything in the Mpumalanga region, especially where there are existing coal-fired power stations, is that you have very substantial grid transmission capacity to evacuate the electricity you generate into the national grid. And so yes, it makes sense to build where the grid is strong. In the Northern Cape, for example, there's lots of sun, but there's no grid capacity, so you can't do anything there. So it makes a lot of sense to repurpose an existing power station rather than sell it off. But it's going to take the same amount of time. It's going to take 2 years. That's what you have to put up the panels and the windmills and so on and so forth. And that's a significant engineering task.
Mm. Yeah, renewables, while of course they're kinder to the environment, to put it in layman's terms, aren't necessarily always reliable. In fact, we've been told that, for instance, because there are so many coal reserves in this country, we're likely to see coal being the mainstay when it comes to producing energy in South Africa. How does that inform plans in the next 2 years, given, even COP27 that's taking place in Egypt and many other concerns around using fossil fuels?
Well, I would question your assumption. Renewables is a tried and tested technology. It provides reliable supplies to systems all over the world, in some cases nearly 100%. And so you can't just focus on solar panels and windmills on their own. You have to see the whole package, which includes storage, battery storage, gas backup, and so on. So if you see that as a whole package, it's very, very reliable. And grid planning in the 21st century starts with demand, and then you work out what's the supply. It used to be the other way around. So it can deliver. But yes, we are going to be burning coal for at least the next 20 years because the transition's a slow one. We're going to gradually shut down the coal-fired power stations until we have 2 left, the 2 new ones, Kusile and Madipe. And to replace what we close, we have to build a large amount of new generation capacity.
Yeah. Well, depending who you speak to, the case for renewables has been dealt a serious blow, given what's taking place in Europe. I mean, some countries now, ironically, backpedaling, or perhaps that's not really the term, but now sort of going the other direction to rely on fossil fuels in order to deal with the winter season. Yes, in part it's because of what's taken place in Ukraine and the war from Russia. But, those who initially would have felt a whole lot more comfortable using renewables because of what's taking place in the global north, are a whole lot more reluctant now because of what these countries in the global north have started to do by relying, ironically, again on coal.
Yeah, well, that's because the South African media narrative has not critically examined those claims. So what's happening in Europe is because of the war and in particular Germany's dependence on gas, suddenly those gas supplies are under threat and they have to substitute that. But that doesn't in any way undermine their commitment to renewables, to the renewables build program. In fact, what is called the Easter package announced in April is a massive extension of the renewable energy targets over the next 2 or 3 decades. So I think the South African reading that there's a kind of reversal because of some kind of unreliability of renewables is a misreading of European countries. For example, there's very little discussion of the fact that half the French nuclear fleet is down, and that is causing another crisis within Europe, because you have to make sure that France has energy. That's got nothing to do with renewables. It's got to do with another technology that many South Africans think is the solution, but it isn't.
Well, all right. So, to be clear, I mean, the transition always has to be exactly that, right? I mean, we're not going to use coal on one day and then in the next completely rely on renewables. That ratio, though, I guess, is also worth speaking about, right? How much of that transition should include coal and for how long? And I guess who gets to decide that?
Well, it's in our existing policies and in Eskom's plans. We have to shut down nearly half the existing coal-fired power stations within the next decade. And going forward, we have to shut nearly all 15 power stations except for 2. And we're not going to find any funding from anywhere, not even from China, to build new coal-fired power stations. So that really does leave renewables for the bulk of your generation, because it's the cheapest option, and it is government policy to go for the lowest cost option. But you do need backup, so you need batteries and you need gas. So it's not like, when people say we're making a transition to solar and wind, and they think of solar panels and windmills, I think, well, how's that going to serve us? Well, what they ignore is the backup infrastructure, batteries, gas, etc., that will be required to make sure that we have exactly what we need. We start with supply and then we work out the demand.
How concerned should we be about how we're going to finance these loans? Because, I mean, this is no small change. I mean, it translates to about 9 billion rand, and this is just from the World Bank alone. And even just this loan, by the way, it's not going to be able to help us realize all our ambitions, will it?
No, I mean, it's actually quite a small amount of money in energy infrastructure terms. It's not a difficult loan to service. About just under $50 million is concessional, and $10 million is grant. 10 billion is 150 million rand, which you could do some quite useful things with. But the grant component is obviously not big enough. So I don't think the repayment is going to be that serious. What is worrying is what's going to happen to our foreign exchange rates. So if things really go pear-shaped in the South African economy, that money is going to cost us a lot more over time if the dollar-rand exchange continues to go. Let me put it that way: continues to go out of whack. That becomes a real challenge for any form of dollar-denominated loan.
In the past, there have been criticism, including in academic spaces, around the conditions that these multinational institutions like the World Bank typically put forward when they give any country any kind of financial assistance. Is that the case with this particular loan? I mean, are there conditions attached to it? And if so, do we know what they are?
There obviously are conditions attached to it, but what we need to realize is that South Africa has been extremely strategic and smart about the energy transition. So the Just Energy Transition Partnership Investment Plan was adopted by Cabinet recently, and the President presented it at the PCC, and then it's been released publicly. Now, what really is interesting about that is that it's a long-term investment plan through to 2050 that calculates out the total investment requirements over the long term, and that is far bigger than 9 billion rand. We probably need around 3.5 trillion rand through to 2050 to finance our energy transition. A large bulk of that is going to come from private sector investments and primarily from within South Africa. So this is a very, very small amount. But to answer your question directly, as long as those conditionalities fit with the cabinet-approved Just Transition Plan, then I think it's a positive development.
All right, Professor Mark Swilling, thanks very much indeed for your time. Really do appreciate your insights this morning. Professor Swilling is with Stellenbosch University Center for Sustainability Transitions. Once again, thanks very much indeed.